Okay, so before I begin, I would like everyone to just take a moment to reflect on your own experience in education. Now, was it a positive one? A negative one? Did you enjoy being in the classroom? Now, think about your peers. What did they tell you about their experiences in the classroom? And, just keep these thoughts in mind as I take you through my talk. School can be fun. Embracing innovation in education. So, to start, what is education? To me, education is by far one of the most important aspects of our society. It is the tool that allows us to create the future. It is this opportunity that so many people around the world fight to earn. So then in this country, why does this right feel more like a chore than a privilege? And so, when I started school at 6 years old, here's a picture of me on the first day of kindergarten, I could not wait to be in that classroom. I would run home every single day, rushing to tell my parents every detail of my day. And I know I wasn't the only one. Me and my friends would spend hours doing our art displays, lab reports, discussing the next book in our book clubs, and all the while in awe at every fact we were discovering about this world around us. And this curiosity and passion to learn, it propelled us to be curious and innovate, and it made learning exciting. And I first started seeing this excitement fading in not only myself, but my peers around middle school. No longer, were we begging our parents to go to school when we were sick, but instead we began faking illnesses, just to skip a single day of school. And I'm sure someone in this room can relate to that. Yes, we have some hands. But school was no longer a place of excitement and innovation, curiosity. Instead, it became a place of despair, stress, anxiety, depression, all these negative words. And, this just kept rising and rising as we, became high schoolers. And I saw firsthand the mental toll school began taking on my friends. And, it began to feel as though my entire grade was running a marathon. And when someone dropped, instead of helping them up, we would cheer and keep running. And mind you, I did come from a competitive high school, so that could be the environment of that. But, it angered me to see that, grades and numbers had more value than our own and our friends' well-being. Learning was no longer exciting. And so, a few years ago, I was riding the subway in New York City, and a woman next to me commented on my t-shirt. I was wearing a shirt that said, "Student Voices Matter." And, she began to talk about herself and told me that she worked for an educational nonprofit and that she also was an op-ed writer for the New York Times. And as someone who was extremely interested in education reform, I began to ask her questions. And what did she think the future of education looked like? And she told me something that day that has stayed with me. She said, think about an operating room from 200 years ago. And here's an image of an operating room from about 200 years ago. And then she said, think about an operating room today. And here's kind of an operation room today. And she said, if a doctor from 200 years ago was to walk into this room today, they would be lost. The technology, the layout, the lights, everything is completely different. And then she continued on. Think about a teacher from 200 years ago, a classroom from 200 years ago. And now think about a teacher walking into a classroom today. They would know exactly what to do, right? Walk straight up to the front, start lecturing at a classroom of students, most likely still seated in rows. And so, and think about your own career for a second. Think about your own environment. How much has changed from 200 years ago to where you are now? And this can be said for almost any field, but for some reason, education is still stuck in this traditional mindset. And, to me, it feels as though the whole world is changing, but for some reason, school is unable to catch up. And now, just for a second, I'm going to pull you out of the United States and just, a little bit of a global aspect of education. Education is, prevalent all over the world. And so on one end of the spectrum, we have Finland and Denmark. And on the other end, we have the United States. One with one of the most highest reported levels of happiness and excitement in terms of learning. And the other side, where 80% of students say that they don't like school, have negative feelings towards school, and would not like to be in the classroom. And this has nothing to do with academic levels of achievement as we're all well aware, the United States is a top academic achiever. But, as you can probably tell by now with my talk, I don't think that, pushing students to breaking points to just get grades and letters is the proper way to be educated. So I think the big question now is, what are they doing that we aren't? And it comes down to kind of a few basic things. To begin, in Finland and Denmark, there's no class rankings. There's no competition. Funds are not allocated where states are pitted against states. And, teachers are called by their first name. And that might not seem like a huge deal. But studies have shown that, that power dynamic plays a huge impact in how children learn. In addition to that, in Finland and Denmark, college is not the only option. In the United States, trade schools are thought of for students who aren't smart enough to get into college. Whereas in Finland and Denmark, they're actually encouraged. And these trade schools are not, just what you would think of as carpentry, metalworking, electrical engineering, but they have coding, entrepreneurship, marketing, sales, these modern skill sets that are so necessary for our future that students can opt to really build and learn from. And so I think Pasi Sahlberg, who is the part of the Ministry of Education in Finland, said it best when he said, we prepare children to learn how to learn, not how to take a test. And in the United States, education is so focused on memorizing information and facts just for your next test, which most likely you're not even going to remember a few days, let alone years later. And so this kind of brings me to one piece of legislation that I think really impacted this culture of the United States as, competitive competition, and that's the No Child Left Behind Act. And I think that this political cartoon really does a good job of, talking about what it is. Basically, what it did was that it allocated funds to states based on standardized test results. And so you can see the pressure on the child who's taking the test right there. The teacher behind him, administrator behind him, and then state actors behind that. And so, it created this culture where students felt so much pressure from internally and externally that learning was no longer about learning. It was about tests, results, and that's it. And, just to quickly kind of talk about this as well, as you can see, it's kind of a cycle. The schools with better resources performed better on their standardized tests, got more money from the state. Students, schools that were not as wealthy did not have the resources for their students, and they did not get funding from states. And this is something that's still kind of happening today, as we can see. And in addition to that, the wealthy schools are most likely in white-filled communities, whereas the poorer schools are in minority-filled communities. And so this not only, creates an inequity within education, but it also creates a racial divide in education, which I think is really important to mention at this part. And so, we've barely scratched the surface with education reform. You can delve into anything that I talked about so much more for hours and hours. And, there's also a million things that I haven't even covered so far. But the biggest thing is, where does innovation come into this? What can we do with education that truly embodies innovation? And this brings me to SmartCards AR. So this is a company that I co-founded with another member of the Worth Institute, a student. And, we began to think about the issue of neurodiversity in education. It's a really kind of hot word right now. But what does it really mean? Neurodiversity can be thought of as any kind of slight variation in the brain that could impact social skills, cognitive ability, just learning in general, kind of how you view light, how you view colors, anything like that. And so we set out to see how can we support these students who feel so unsupported in school right now. And so we created SmartCards AR, which is an augmented reality flashcard-based platform. And here's a short video, if it plays. All right, there we go. And that's kind of what it looks like overall. It's a flashcard that kind of pops to life. You can interact with it. It's customizable. And what we really saw was that these children who are neurodiverse began being separated from the classroom from kindergarten, first grade. And once this gap is created, it's never bridged back. And as we can see, back into high school, these children still are outside the classroom. They're still not invited back in, and they're thought of as less. They're thought of as not as smart. And all these misconceptions create stereotyped biases, which impact employment and their future in general. And so we created this as a way to really close that gap, or take a step to close that gap. And, show people that neurodiversity is not a weakness, but instead it's a strength that we have to play to. And, we really need to find those specific strengths and work for that and help students really find their way back into the classroom. And at this point, I'd just like to mention that, we are student entrepreneurs. And so, we're always looking for support, help, advice, anything at all. Thoughts, if you would like to chat later, I would love to talk. And, as I wrap up my talk, as you can probably tell, I think that we really need to change education, the way we learn, the way we view learning, in a really big way. It's these concepts, these intangibles of, learning from failure, collaboration, respect, that are really going to take students to the next level. And it's these kind of intangibles that create an environment that makes a student excited to learn, makes a student want to learn, and it creates an environment that students can create the change they want to make, And if Zoom has taught us anything, no one wants to stare at a screen or stare at a person for hours just lecturing. That doesn't teach us the knowledge we need, or how to apply the knowledge in a way to create a better future. And, it's these intangibles that are going to create the future that I think we can all be proud to stand behind. Thank you so much.